Welcome to another episode of Design in Progress. We got probably a pretty short episode today because me and Will are just going to be doing a debrief. We just got back from Metatopia 2024, which was awesome. So we're just going to talk about what Metatopia is and how that went, basically. Talk for 10-15 minutes and we'll be done. Update on some stuff, the usual. So for those who don't know, Metatopia is a convention of, it's kind of like a proto-spiel, which is kind of the generic term for it, where it's, a bunch of people playing their games that are still in progress, although this one is all designers, basically. So you go and people play your game a couple times, and then you play a couple other people's games a couple times. So great for networking, great for talking to different people, getting different opinions, especially from designers who kind of maybe know the ins and outs of design a little bit better. So it was really awesome to just, it was but maybe 150, 200 people, something like that.
Yeah, I feel like that. And it was over a pretty significant amount of area space, so you didn't feel cramped next to a bunch of people. So both the conversations and the gameplay were such that you were kind of able to hear and have the freedom to do what you needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, they had one area that was just board games and card games, but then they had an entire RPG area. They had an entire LARPing area. They had a couple seminars on just, board game design and running a business as a board game and all the legal stuff behind running a board game company. And, and then they had very specific, pull out tests where it's like, I want to, pull out this specific part of my game and let's really focus on this with people who know what they're talking about on that. Are you really interested in deck builders or something like that? So we got some really interesting feedback, which we're gonna go over now. So for those who don't know, why did you click on this video? Will and I are designing a deck builder, Dungeons of Gul-Drun. That's kind of an atypical deck builder, where you don't just pick one card at a time and you don't really get to pull anything out of your deck. You just add stuff to your deck, and they're specifically stats. So it's like a dungeon crawler, you're a team of adventurers, and as you delve deeper into the dungeon, you get to level up specific stats, and those stats give you a pack of 4 cards, the same 4 cards every time. So with that, that's the long and the short of it. If you want to know more about that, you can go, there's going to be video linked somewhere, probably down below, and go watch us play that game because it's fun. But for the rest of this, we'll just kind of be talking about the feedback that we got and how we think that might change the game as we go forward. So Will is the note taker extraordinaire, so he's going to start talking, and then we'll start talking.
Yeah. So as far as the best part was, the most consistent note we got was that the uniqueness of the deck builder is something that we managed to pull off and feels fun. So like you were talking about, like you said, it's a little bit different because we're pulling these packs in. Basically everyone who had experience with deck builder saying, hey, that worked. It was fun. It did what it was supposed to do. That was probably the most consistent thing we heard, and was really heartening to kind of get a game out and be like, great, we're doing it
right.
initially,
especially because
right
I do feel like we have played with some people online who are just like, I don't get it. I don't get what's happening. And we've only been working on it for a month or two, and
Mm-hmm.
both me and Will have been like, we think this is fun. Certainly someone else will think this is fun and that this works. So it heartening, I think, is the correct word there, of just having somebody else be like, yeah, that did work. That was fun. Good job. And you're like, yes, the idea worked.
So yeah, I'd say if I were to kind of breaking it down into the categories of worked the best, what, and the spectrum kind of going down to the things that need the most focus. Our characters and our character decks and our stat decks are great. They're in great shape. And the comments were going to be little things like, hey, you have status effects. Let's get a more straightforward and easy to understand way to know what statuses are in play and what they mean. Instead of just doing a color, let's have something that actually says poison,
and a reminder of what all of the statuses actually do and all that. And obviously the stuff that we had printed out was very alpha of just literally just to the point where we could barely play it. So that was not a surprising note. I did think a surprising note was, I have felt like up till now, like I did one test where I was playing for 4 characters a while ago, where I just played through 3 or 4 levels because we had made some big changes and we wanted to print off some cards. And before we printed them off, I wanted to be like, okay, let me just make sure nothing is like ridiculously broken. And I played as Wizard in that test, and I felt that Wizard was like kind of like meh, because he was just like he was just kind of drawing cards, and maybe I was just specking into it oddly, but one of our playtesters played as the Wizard, and they just made it be completely broken. So that definitely does need a little bit of tweaking here or there, but they were just able to consistently be like, well, I just used this one card and I spec'd out into as many different stats as I could, and this card is based off of hitting a copy. So they're like, and I do 15 mental damage to this guy. And you're like, okay, you kill him. Good job.
Which, in fairness, that card that lets you kind of draw until you hit a duplicate and deal damage equal to that, we did have another player pull that into their Bard deck, and it even played well for them. And I think that's probably the best we've seen that individual card play almost across the board of all the play tests. So that was definitely an interesting, cool, but like
Right, and
not that we
it is
expected.
kind of supposed to be a big flashy card, so
Yeah,
I'm not disappointed by that. I'd have to go and look. It might want to be if it because I thought it was a wizard card, but maybe it's an intelligence card.
it's an intelligence card. The wizard card is the one that deals damage equal to your discard pile, which and those two cards combo together really well, which was also how a couple people were
Right.
able to really go
And it
off.
might be one of those things where you just need one or the other of those. You know, we might not
Mhm.
need both of them or something. You know, they both are able to do absurd amounts of damage out of nowhere. Which
Which actually
I
kind of, I was going to
somewhat of an
say,
absurd amount of damage, cool. A lot of absurd amount of damage, especially with intellect, where you can get like 5 copies of that card in your deck. Oh, and you're able to draw and sift through your deck very quickly. Could get dangerous fast.
and that kind of being able to go off and be really impressive in that way segues into another thing that I noticed, which is our cleric wisdom based character. Their cards have a lot of abilities to take extra, basically do extra actions on their turn, which worked great. But we had another player who was sitting next to them say it was kind of funny for me as a ranger to be, in theory, this quick, dexterous character, but I was only doing one thing a turn, and next to me was a cleric, this wisdom character who was then playing 3 or sometimes 4 cards
hmm
in a turn, and that felt counterintuitive to their expectations of a ranger.
Right. And that isn't kind of an interesting weird thing because for me that wisdom is like it may be just kind of like an own personal preference kind of thing, that the wisdom is like I am really smart so I can do lots of these weird mental attacks. Like I can be healing and also doing a mental attack at the same time kind of thing. Like I'm good at multitasking basically
Mhm.
was how I was trying to flavor it. And I think it just came across as them being this like crazy monk who's like like throwing out a bunch of spells, and I was like, yeah, that is a little odd. But so that might be a flavor thing, or it might be something where that those
Yeah.
additional actions move around, or maybe they're just become more prevalent throughout in total, you know, where everybody gets one thing that's do this and then do an additional action, you know.
Mhm. And the Ranger also had a couple other interesting comments to it, specifically around the use of companions. So, as of now, we have 3 companions, one that does physical, one that does ranged, and one that does poison damage. A pretty easy addition to that would be a fourth one that can do mental damage, and we heard that a couple times. But then towards the end, we started to hear kind of some conversation about the summon companion card as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
It really didn't come up in. We didn't have a ranger in the first game, so it didn't come up for that. But we did have companions played in the second and third games we did. In the second game, they worked great, and it seemed like the summon companion was used multiple times. I'd say in more than 50% or 75% of the rounds.
Mm-hmm.
In the last game, our player felt that the summon companion wasn't really useful in the first round of the game, even though they drew it. And then it
Mm.
started to gain a little bit of use, but didn't really feel as impactful as another
Mm-hmm.
card could have been. So we had some suggestions we were given about how maybe to tweak the concept of the companions,
Right.
but that requires a much
And
deeper conversation.
and you know, I'm trying to think through because me and Will separately, I don't think we ever talked about this on stream or anything. That eventually what we would like to do is for each of the classes, would have their own kind of player boards that would be individual to them with, some art or something like that. But that would also have some sort of kind of tech tree that where as you level up, you maybe have to make some decisions back and forth. Do I want to be a cleric that's more fighty or a cleric that's more healy? And then maybe I get like a really big spell that does this, or a really big spell that does this that I don't even need a card for, or something like that. And I was thinking earlier today that maybe that becomes part of just the like Rangers board is maybe they have less of that, but in exchange for having less of that, they like can always summon a companion.
Hmm.
Instead of taking an action, we have like instead of an action you can discard 2 cards to do one mental or one physical. That they could also have instead of taking an action like discard 2 cards to summon a companion, and like that's their turn. Is they that card gets removed from the deck and just becomes part of their board at any time that they could do that. Um, I don't. That might be kind of broken, but and maybe it doesn't scale as like it usually does. Like it scales right now. You can do like one, and then you can get two, and then you can get three. Maybe it just is always one, but you could do it, 3 turns in a row, and then have 3 of your companions out if you wanted to. So it's kind of more like a special thing as opposed to a card.
So, but I mean, and those were kind of all really like great suggestions over how to make our character decks and our stat decks better, and were really helpful. I'd say on the flip side of that, the monster decks, and we went into Minitopia kind of having this perspective anyway, that the monsters needed to be evaluated with the same depth that we had done for the character and stat card. So it's like a little bit of like how the sausage is made. We really drilled down and spent a good several weeks saying, okay, how do we make these character decks and these stat decks really consistent and equal in terms of
Right,
power,
right.
but also
Consistently,
having these
mental
different
should do this unless it's
flavors.
doing something else, in
Yeah.
which case it's like -1, and if it's a big flash ability with a downgrade, then it can get +1, and we kind of did that throughout all of the different
Mhm.
cards, so that if you're playing a card that does mental damage in your deck, it's going to be around the same as somebody else's. Maybe it does slightly more, but maybe you have a downside, or they get to do some, but they also get to draw a card or something like that. So on average, cards that are in different people's decks tend to be about the same. And yeah, that took a lot of work. That took like 3 different big giant iterations of like
Yeah.
tearing everything down and rebuilding it and tearing it down and building it up. Okay, I think we're at like a good spot.
And so yeah, that's probably where we're gonna move on to monsters as like that the focus of like the next real big drill down, and got some really interesting and helpful suggestion ideas, which will make that process very interesting to kind of test and run through. Everything from we like the diversity in your monsters. It doesn't feel like just your classic fantasy where it's only the 3 types of things that just have better armor at higher levels. So
Right,
there's
right.
those
It's
like the
three enemies that are
green,
just getting reskinned,
yeah. So
This one
and
is
that was
this
great.
one's red and this one's blue.
But on that, there was a suggestion that okay, so your idea of what the monsters are have great diversity and great specificity. Maybe put that into the types of abilities they have. Let's try and make the instead of having them all say have 6 potential things they could do, maybe that becomes smaller for some, but more flavored towards what that monster type might do. And then maybe some have more potential things they can do because that's exactly the kind of flavor
Hmm.
that their type would have.
Right, right. And I think on general, there was a consistent feedback that our monsters were just undertuned.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody. We had one person come very close to dying, and that was in a 3-player game, not a 4-player game. And they had like some just they were the healer, and they just didn't draw healing cards for like 2 full encounters,
Mhm.
basically. And you're like, yeah, sometimes that happens, you know.
And
But
they were hit with a pretty healthy chunk of lashback damage, which is another thing for us to chat about when we
right,
get to it.
right, right. So it's going to be a lot of tweaking on the monsters in specific, and then how those monsters worked. I mean, it's interesting taking something from Tabletop Simulator and then actually doing it in real life and having to like pick up an actual dice and roll the dice. Be like, okay, they're gonna do action 5, and then go through and then have to pick up a second dice because it's harder to like be like this die is gonna go to this person, this guy's gonna go to this person.
Mhm.
In Tabletop Simulator, you can just select them all and roll them in place, and you can't quite do that in real life.
And something I actually noticed between the three games. So, in terms of us running it, we were basically doing the dice rolling as
Hmm.
almost the people running the test. And by the time we got to the third game, one of the players actually said to me, "Hey, why don't we, the players, roll the d6s that
Hmm.
determine what the monsters are going to do?" And
Right.
I thought it was great, but it also kind of underlined this aspect of,
Of how
for the
slow it
players,
was. Yeah.
combat slowed everything down because of that dice rolling.
Well, combat didn't.
Yeah, sorry, yeah,
Their combat, the monsters' combat,
yes,
did slow everything down. Yeah, their combat was fine.
yes. The round prep, figuring out like going,
Yes.
because you would roll between each round, kind of you okay, the round next round time. All right, we got
Right.
to roll a bunch of dice. Now maybe look at your cards and decide what you're going to do.
Right. Right. And one really big suggestion that I think I want to do. I have kind of two avenues that I want to try. One would be that the targeting or the initial targeting is somehow stat based. So it's like, you know, this thing when it comes out is going to target the person with the most strength, or the person with the most dex, or the person with the highest life, or the person with the lowest life, or something like that. And with some caveats for ties, of course. Um, so that there's no dice rolling for who it's targeting. You know, it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they're targeting this person, they're targeting this person, they're targeting this person. Done. And then if it would do that, that they're whether they have 4 or 6 or 2 or 8 abilities, that it would just literally be a sequence of like do number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Um, so so that you would know not only what it's about to do, but what it's going to do next turn and the turn after that. Um, so there's no randomness to it, and that could create like an interesting dynamic of like, oh, this thing is just going to consistently like deal. It's, you know, it has 2 abilities. It's going to deal 3 damage to one person, and then it's going to do 2 damage to everybody, and then 3 damage to one person, and then 3 damage to 2 damage to everybody. It's just going to pop back and forth, and this one's going to do like 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then it's going to blow up. And so if we can just like hold on to shield and healing long enough, it'll just blow itself up, and we don't even need to worry about it. Cool. You know, like there are some interesting things you can do along those lines. Um, the other kind of option, which I really liked, was we have a couple cards that are like actual places. Like we have Crumbling Labyrinth, or no, we have a Crumbling Maze, and we have a Labyrinth card, and I think we have one other. I think there's one in each kind of chunk of creature decks. But they're like, why is there this just like a separate deck that comes out with every encounter and say like, okay, these monsters are fighting us in
The labyrinth or
the
the mag
labyrinth
pit.
or the magma chamber or whatever, and then you literally just like place out the whatever, the 2 or the 3 or the 4 monsters kind of into slots on that terrain, which would just be a card, and that whatever slot they're in has a specific thing that's like, okay, this slot targets player number 2, and this targets player number 3, and this one targets player number 4, and then that would also have some amount of programming in it, where it's like, okay, this monster in slot 1 is going to do action 1 and then action 3. This one's going to do action 2 and then action 4, and then this one's going to do only action 6 over and over and over again, or something like that, so that there is no more dice rolling. In both of those options, there's not really any more dice rolling. It's literally just prescribed. It's just how we want to end up doing that prescription of like, they're going to go through a set thing that is significantly easier to track. You know, we can literally just use a cube to be like, it's going to do this turn, and the next turn we know it's going to go bounce between these 2 or bounce between these 4 or whatever it ends up being.
And of course, how that order would work changes based on what the terrain is and like what your monsters are would change it. So even if we are effectively creating a system that would be the same every time
Mm-hmm.
it comes out, it isn't the same because it might be a different it's a different monster, or
Yeah,
it's a
there's a
different
different
person's
monster in each of the
targeting or
slots,
something
and
like that.
we could even throw abilities onto those rooms. So it's like, oh, it's a magma chamber. Everybody is going to take 1 damage at the beginning of a turn as long as we're in this room because it's fucking hot, you know. Like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we need to get through this really fast, or maybe there's one where we're just going to heal up. Like maybe there's the opposite. It's the healing room. We'll take our time on this one. It's
Yeah.
fine. Like this is gonna be a cakewalk. Um,
See, the one concern I have, and it's more with the first idea than the second idea,
mm,
is if we have one where we have different monsters that have a different number of abilities, then we would need some way to track for each monster which one it's on. Because obviously, if one monster has 6 and one monster has 4, then sure, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and turn 4, it's all the same. But then you're going to be at turn 1 and turn 5, then turn 2 and turn 6, then turn 1 and turn 3, and just whether it's just like a chit on the monster that
Yeah,
just
I was
moves
assuming there'd
forward
be a
isn't that
cube
hard.
that like kind of moves along a track on the card, and it just goes like
Mhm.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and this one goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'll get out of sync, but you're just moving it down every time, one every time. Um, and that's
There,
certainly
someone had
something to
brought up
test,
a
and it could even just be something where like there's always 6 abilities, but um, those
it,
six
1, 2,
abilities.
3 might be the same as
Right, it might be
4,
one,
5, 6.
ABC, ABC, AB, AB, AB,
Yeah,
like so that there's always 6, but they can repeat or something like
yeah.
that. So, and then
I think.
that even allows for like A, B, A, B, B, C. And you're like, "Whoa, okay, so it has like it goes
Mhm.
through a cycle and then it does a big thing."
Which would work. I mean, that's and if
Mhm.
the issue with that, which hasn't been as much of an issue, but then if you're having 6 things on there, then you have to be able to see all 6 of them and have the space on the card. Which I mean, if it comes to us having to slightly redesign the
Mhm.
shape of the monster cards, that might have been happening with the use of train cards anyway. Not
Right,
a big deal.
right. Yeah. I mean, tarot being a standard size is helpful to have.
Yes.
So, but you sparked something in my brain, and now I forgot it. I don't know what it is. It's the life of a designer. I was going to say,
ABBA,
yeah,
AABBC.
it's gone. It's gone.
Okay. Okay.
It was something about monsters.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
As someone in everyone's life always says, well, if it was an important idea, it'll come back. If
I
you forgot it, it wasn't that important.
I keep saying that to my older son, and he's only like 4, and he keeps just going, yeah, but I never remember, Dada. I never remember. I'm like, yeah, buddy, me too.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. My dad's
um,
solution to that is he has like a recorder. Like he literally has like a
yeah,
dictaphone
like
in
an
his
old
pocket. I'm
an
like,
old school
how are
recording.
you trapped in like
1984, yeah.
right, exactly. Like, why are you doing that?
So one of those mini cassettes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, was there any other big things? I mean,
Lashback.
Lashback. That
Lashback
was
was
the
kind
other
of the
thing.
biggest one where we had. So I wish I could say that there was a consistent criticism, but
Oh my God, it was so
across the
annoying.
3 games, it was different. So I think the first game, it was like, it feels complicated. We want it to be static and don't swap between who's rolling the die, player, monster. And then the next game, it was like, Lashback's really cool. The randomness of it is the best part of combat. So keep it random, but just make it a little like less math, but keeping it random is great. And the final one, it was like, no, 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 no. Lashback needs to be, that can be a little bit of math,
Mm-hmm.
but just keep it like static how you're determining the math. So it's
Right.
always going to be a comparison of, monster to player, no dice rolling, and you know what's going to happen. So no random, yes, math. We got to figure it
Yes.
out.
I mean, I think that there's kind of 2 avenues that we could do, which is right now we have like you compare stats and then roll a dice and then kind of compare stats again, and then whatever the difference is, you take that much damage, which is needlessly complicated. I agree. Watching it happen in actual real time, you're like, oh yeah, this is confusing. This is not a good. This is not good. So we can do just the straight comparison. Like, okay, I have a 13 and they have a 15. They're going to do 2 damage to me when I attack them. And I just know that going in, but I know I'm going to do 8 damage to them when I'm attacking them, or 6 damage,
Mhm.
whatever. So it's fine that I'm going to take 2 damage. I just know that. And that makes monsters more dangerous just on a flat, which we need anyway. So not a huge deal if we just go with that. And then I think the other thing is we could just take away the stat comparison entirely, take away that kind of middle stat that the monsters have, the shield stat, whatever it is, and then go back to a dice and then change the dice to literally just be like a 0, 0, 1, 2, 3 or something, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3. So it's like, okay, whenever you attack something physically, it's going to roll and then it's going to take that much damage. Whenever anything attacks, if it physically, if it's attacking you, it's gonna roll the dice. If you attack it, you're gonna roll the dice. So there'll still be that little bit of thing, but it's like whenever any physical attacks happen, you risk anywhere from taking 0 to 3 damage, and then it's static-ish, and it's not just, oh, there's a 50% chance you'll take this much damage. But I like
I
that.
think
I like that less, but.
I like that list as well. I think for me, I think what our touchstone or whatever you want to call it for in the third game, we had one player who jumped in a little bit after we started explaining the rules, and he specifically said, I maybe I didn't hear the explanation for lashback and that's why, but I didn't understand it for the entire game despite other people doing it. And that seemed like a problem to me. So in my mind, I think lashback is a mechanic that however it gets designed, it is most important that it can be understood by someone from watching it happen a
Hmm.
couple times.
Right. That they're like, okay, I
It
have this
needs to be
stat, they
that
have that
simple.
stat, I take that much damage.
Yeah. And then it's great because I think in general a lot of people liked Lashback. It was just the complications aspect.
Yeah. Hmm.
So if it's something that is easy enough to get picked up from seeing it a couple times,
Hmm.
then that's kind of the sweet spot of the fun of it, but not to complication of it.
Right. Right.
So
Well, that's the hope at least.
that's the hope. Yeah.
Right. And then, I mean, the interesting thing that we can do with that is knowing that there's no randomness. If we come up with some sort of jiggered, jerry-rigged, them targeting a specific thing, something that is going to do a lot of physical attacking, but maybe has a low stat, is going to be like, okay, that specifically targets the person who's like the least likely to give them lashback damage or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So, I mean, there's some interesting things that we can do there, definitely. Lots and lots to keep thinking on and
Yeah.
keep figuring out. So. But overall, very good. We also did do some tests of Neon Nexus there, and everyone was like, "Hey, this is a game that is basically
Yeah.
done. You should have better art." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know I should have better art. That's the next step."
Yeah. It needs to be like this is not going to change once I make the art.
Right.
Then I can make the art.
It was really funny getting to the point where people just kept being like, "I wish these icons were different." I'm like, "Me
Me
too.
too.
That's the best you got, man. Like, I'm happy."
Yeah.
So it was a great weekend overall. I will say the brain drain is for real because not only were we teaching people, I taught people Neon Nexus twice and sat there and helped Will run the three tests for Dungeons of Gul-Drun, but then I also played three other people's games. Learned those and gave them feedback, and by the end, my brain is just like, I need a day where nobody talks to me.
Yeah. It reminded me of so I did the viewers don't
Mm-hmm.
know this, but I mean, I did mock trial in undergrad, and it,
Mm-hmm.
it had the same feeling where like I drank my coffee, be energized at the beginning of the day, and then I would be running on adrenaline the entire day, and then the moment it ended, it would like I can't physically do anything else. I need to like
Like,
plug myself
need to
into a
just
wall and
lie
recharge.
down and not fall asleep, but just lie down and
Yep,
stare at a blank wall.
yep, and then do it again tomorrow.
Yep, and then again tomorrow. Yep. Well,
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing that next year, and looking forward to seeing what we come up with for the changes to all of the monsters and how those work. I think that's
Yeah.
the biggest chunk is everything that monsters do.
And
is
definitely next year, 17 more games. We'll just be trying.
17. Yeah,
That's it.
just keep churning out the games. It
Just
was one of
keep-
the funniest things is like I was just so hyped up from working and like talking to people and all of this, but obviously didn't want to make changes actively to Dungeons of Gul-Drun as we were going, and Neon Nexus is basically done. So I like came home and immediately during the night started working on the Hex space adventure factiony game that we played a couple months ago on stream. But I was just like, I have been like, it's just been churning in the back of my head for like the past year of like, okay, I can make this change, I can make this change, I can make this change, and then tweak this, and change that, and like gathering like little bits of information, like, ooh, that's a cool little. If I use this as a mechanic here, that fixes this problem. If I use this as a like a way to show health, that fixes this problem here, and they finally all coalesced. And I'm like, okay, I can start working on it again. I'm ready. It's like I felt like a Jedi or something. Like the time has come. The time is now. So look forward to also being able to do some more testing of that in the coming months as Neon Nexus comes to a close, having Dungeons of Gul-Drun kind of in the Neon Nexus spot, and as yet unnamed. It, this is a really funny kind of side tangent on this specific thing. we have been testing and designing this game for 4 years now. We started during the pandemic, and it's been shelved for kind of 2.5 years. But literally, almost every single document or folder that I have for the game has a different name. Like the Google Dot is star hex war dice, and then the folder on my computer where they're all stored is just hex wars, and then I have a different Google Doc with some other stuff on it that's like dice wars, and this is like everywhere in my computer it's labeled completely differently. It's not consistent at all.
Yep. I think like if you go back to our like our conversations when we were like doing it 2.5 or 3 years ago, it's like
Mhm.
Star Dice Wars. There's like literally every different way you can say hex, war, star, space, just
Dice, hexing, war, faction, battle,
yeah.
arena. We've called that every which way. So uh, at some point in time, we'll probably do a kind of designer chat about that, explaining how the hell that game works and why it works, and hopefully that it's fun.
Yeah.
But anything else, Will?
Nah, it was
No,
fun.
it was fun. It was a great weekend. It was exhausting, but a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
alrighty, well, with that, we'll see y'all next time. Bye bye.